everyone. This is Dr. Bob Randall, and he did his anthropological, I can't even say that word this morning, doctoral work in the Philippine food system ecology and lived and worked in the Gulf Coast for 34 years. He is one of the 8 founders of Urban Harvest, and we all know what that is. He continues to teach, and he is an author of the best-selling year-round vegetable, fruits, and flowers for Metro Houston, and I have that book right here. And we still have one more available here in our office. We purchased 10, and we've sold 9 so far. So without any further ado, Dr. Randall, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Good morning. It's nice to have a chance to chat with all of you. And what I was asked to do was to speak for about 45 minutes on the topic of selecting fruits that will work where you are. And that's something I've been paying a lot of attention to, along with vegetable growing. And that would be another topic for another day. But I think there's a whole lot to be learned from this. And so I'm going to just go through some various topics here. I teach about roughly 7 hours or so of fruit pruning every year. And what I want to do is basically talk a little bit about how you think about fruits that you want to grow. I've rated about 75 different fruit tree types for growing in Southeast Texas. And I've done it on this scale, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and I, because that's one people generally know. But what you want in a fruit is something where we know a lot about it. It's productive, it's tasty, it's long-lived, relatively easy to care for, doesn't have too many pests. It doesn't cost too much to operate, the fruits at a young age, and all that would be really nice. And there are a whole lot of fruits in that category, depending on where you live. And much better than most. There's a whole bunch that are well worth doing. And then these ones down here in the checkered category, some people really like some of these checkered ones. Some people don't. So you'll find differences of opinion. Sometimes these are productive, but not terribly good if you have a small amount of land to put them on. If you have a big farm or something, you could have easily 60, 70 kinds of fruits if you want to do that. But those are the 3 main categories. Disappointing, people try these things all the time, and they basically have lots of issues. They're tasty, but not productive. Productive, not very tasty. All this kind of stuff. Some of them are not tasty or productive. But I could think of examples of all of these types. And some of these are not going to grow where you are. Doesn't matter what you do unless you're in a 2-story greenhouse or something like that. And and that's not impossible to do if you have a barn or something and you put a bunch of lights up there and keep it warm in the winter. There are a lot of things you can grow in pots. And then there's a ton of fruits that grow somewhere on the planet that we just don't have any idea whether they're going to grow here or not, or very, very little experience. So here is the question that I want to point out about where is here. You're in Waller County. I'm southwest loop area of Houston. Quite a bit different weather, actually. And places like Huntsville or something are even more strange, or Galveston Island. So what I want to start out talking about is temperatures in fruit plants, but a lot of what I have to say about temperatures in fruit plants is something you could somewhat similar for vegetables too. Most fruits are perennial. They need to last for 10, 20 years or more. A few of them are annuals like cantaloupes and watermelons. Strawberries don't last very long. But they need the right temperatures and the right moisture. And I've been having good luck where I am with papayas, but you're not going to probably, if you're in Waller, do very well with papayas at all. And all of these different fruits have their own special temperature needs. Bananas, some of the best bananas will survive down to about 18, but they don't grow below 50. So they're going to stop growing soon as your temperatures start at night getting below 50 degrees. So you have a shorter season the colder your climate. And they're not going to therefore produce as well. And pears and grapes, they have got all sorts of issues with going dormant. And if you don't get the variety that has the right amount of winter chill for your area where you are located, you're going to be in trouble. And we'll get to that in a bit. But basically, that's what it is. If you have the wrong thing, it's going to die or be unproductive. It's going to take up your attention, your time, your money, and you're not going to get much of anything, if anything. And then there are things that need a whole lot of water or not very much. Where I am, it's a little bit too wet for avocados, and blueberries without irrigation, not enough. And anyhow, so all this stuff is temperatures affect plants. This is a broad example of what happens with any plant and probably any animal, more or less, even human beings. Basically, they thrive at a certain temperature, whatever that is, and they do fairly well on a little bit colder, a little bit hotter. A lot colder, a lot hotter, they do poorly. Even hotter or colder, they don't grow at all. And then if it gets too hot or too cold, they die. Excuse me. So basically what happens is that in order to get a good fruit, or this is true of a good vegetable, you need to be growing it for the time it needs to produce well in the right temperatures. So every fruit's got to be sized for your location, your climate. And if it's going to be there for 10 or 20 years, you're talking about 10 or 20 years of climate. And if it's a vegetable, you're talking about maybe 3 months of climate. But whichever it is, you're basically going to do well or poorly depending on how close you are to this kind of area right here. So there are two broad classes of fruits. Fruit trees that come from colder climates have to go dormant in the winter. They have to lose their leaves. They have to take most of their sap out of their wood so that they are hardier. Some cases they put more sugars into their cells, but somehow or other they have to get through the coldest temperatures every winter. And this is probably, if you're master gardeners, you're aware of this, at least generally. But they lose their leaves whenever in the fall, come air, soil, temperatures, sometimes sunlight begin to decline to a certain point. they go dormant. They drop their leaves. We see this with apples, with figs, with pears, with persimmons, grapes, and so on. And the other part of this, though, is that sometime in the spring, they have to wake up again. So that's whenever the amount of cold has been there long enough. And the long enough question is the whole name of the game. What happens at that point is the sap rises, the tree buds start enlarging, their leaves and flowers, and eventually fruit. And if this process doesn't happen at the right time, you got all kinds of trouble. Long enough winter chill depends on the genetics of the tree. There are low chill apples and high chill apples. There are low chill blackberries and high chill blackberries, low chill blueberries and high chill blueberries. And so it really depends on what variety you're growing. And if you get the wrong tree, what's going to happen? You put something that is a tropical apple like Anna or something like that, and you put it in a place that's too cold, let's suppose Crockett maybe, basically it's going to leaf out, and then they're going to get creamed by a late frost. You're going to lose all its leaves, and it won't be productive, and it may die, but it probably just will put out new leaves eventually, but it's going to be weak and it isn't going to produce anything. And on the other hand, if it waits too long in the spring till the temperatures are high and so on, you're going to have poor leafing out. You're just going to get tufts of leaves on the end of branches. Then leaves are what pull the carbon in and make sugars, so you're not going to get fruit. Poor growth may die, and so on. And I've tried to grow Fuji apples, for example, and that happens with them. It's just they're, and same thing's true with a lot of cherries where I am. So if you have a temperate tree, you need to know how much winter chill you will get most years where you are, and you need fruits that need that amount of chill. So you need good information as to what those are and how much you need to know what you've got where you are. There are a whole lot of ways to calculate chill. There's one that's particularly good for southeastern United States that Dr. Byrne at Texas A&M has championed. And there's a website for that in my book. We can talk about chill stuff, but people generally in the subtropics do not talk about chill hours. That's something that was created for Utah, where they get cold winters. And it doesn't work very well here doing anything by hours at all. So we talk about chill units, for example, and we'll get a bit to that later on. There's another class of trees as well, tropical and semi-tropical fruits. And they don't have chill requirements. They don't need to go dormant in winter at all, and most of them don't. Some of them go somewhat dormant in dry weather and so on, but mostly they don't have a dormancy cycle like that. They may go a bit, semi-tropical sometimes go a bit what's called quiescent in the winter. They don't grow vigorously like citrus, for example. But they don't really go dormant, and they don't really lose their leaves in a concerted way either. And so the big deal for them depends on how cold it gets in the winter. So instead of it being chill in terms of how much cold they get over the winter, It's the question of how cold did it get on one particular night? Gets too cold and they're fried. And different fruits have different temperatures at which they start being damaged or killed. Semi-tropicals and tropicals, generally, the thicker the wood and the less vigorous it's growing, the more resistant it is to being killed. And the thinner the branches, the more vibrant the growth is late in the fall, the more damage they get. What you need to know to grow those is just how low is it likely to get in your lowest temperatures in the winter. And you need to plant most of your fruits that fairly easily survive these coldest temperatures. If you mess with that, you're going to need to make sure that it's highly protected. And you can do that with a couple of plants. I grow tropical guavas where I am, for example, but if I have to do it more than 1 year in 10, I'm not interested. There are many ways to protect fruit trees in a really bad freeze, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But what I'm saying is that the key issue is most of your semi-tropical and tropical fruits have got to be able to tolerate your typical winter temperatures. And so, for example, I'm getting fairly good production now with both bananas and papayas. That's not something I used to do, but it's probably not a good idea at this point in Waller just yet, but it may well be the way temperatures are changing. We'll get to that in a bit. So anyway, every fruit, every plant has got air temperatures, soil temperatures, pollination temperatures, harvesting temperatures, all that they prefer. And another thing is our hot temperatures in the summertime. A lot of these things avocados come from hilly regions in Central America, more or less, and Mexico originally, and they basically don't tolerate really hot temperatures well. So that's another problem. And so basically the trick here is understanding your location, the place where you are, and getting the right fruit trees for that. And then from a point of view of trying to educate people, and if you're master gardeners, I know that's one of the things you try to do, we need simplified schedules and recommendation lists that help, but they need to be for specific locations. It's not good enough to be in Waller to be using something that works, say, where I am, which is in the Hobby Airport weather station area, or where, say, College Station is, where you might get advice coming out of Texas A&M. Basically, it's got to be for Waller, if you're in Waller. And so you need to know something about the temperatures in recent years. And that it used to be hard to do, but now it's easier because a lot of this is online. You need to know a lot about the temperature requirements of the specific plants and the length of time you will need these temperatures. And cantaloupes, as I said, probably 3 months. But if I plant a pear, I'm hoping for 20 years at least. And it really is the same thing, doesn't matter what you are growing. You need to be aware of these issues. And so, you can find out, somebody finds out something here, and then it'll work for people that have the similar climate. So let's talk about the Southeast Texas climate in general, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about your area. So there's a huge range of temperatures from Gulf Islands to Crockett, which is more or less the edges of Southeast Texas, north to south to north. And there's a huge range of temperatures from urban areas to rural areas. There's a lot of difference from day to night and winter to summer, as everybody knows, but there's also differences from year to year based on major pressure oscillations, particularly in the tropical Pacific, but also in other places. And so what I'm saying is that like winters like the one coming up are going to be a bit warmer than another winter where you had an El Nino, for example. And there's huge differences even on the same property between a sheltered area on the southwest of a house, say, and an open area to the north with clear skies above. You're going to have huge difference in temperatures, which you can take advantage of. Here are some generalizations. Places like Galveston stay warm later in the fall and winter and stay cool longer in the spring. Then places far from the Gulf like Huntsville, they stay hotter than Galveston in the early fall and warm up faster in the spring, but they also get cool fast in the fall. So what happens is in some place like Huntsville, they go from hotter than Galveston to cooler than Galveston in the fall quite fast. So Galveston has a relatively long season, and some place like Huntsville has a relatively short season if they're not using greenhouses. And the same thing's true in the spring. So that has advantages and disadvantages depending. Another thing to say here is in August, Galveston goes from about 80 at night to 90 in the morning, whereas Huntsville goes from about 72 at night to 97 in the morning. And so what I'm saying is the temperature ranges and climate are quite different from one place to another, and you can't actually talk to, say, somebody in Galveston or in Huntsville and just use that advice for Waller. You're going to have to actually know how Waller works if you're in Waller. And another thing too is that the more urban you are versus rural, that has a big effect on temperatures also. Is generally about a 7-degree warmer in any fairly dense urban area versus a very rural area. And they're hotter earlier in the spring. They are hotter later in the fall. So you would expect, say, College Station, for example, to be hotter, or Brenham to be hotter than a rural area outside of town. What I'm saying too is that that's what you need to be aware of. So the book has got a lot of tables in it, but this is a period from 2007 to 2017. And this is the average daily high in January at Houston Hobby for 10 years, the average low, and the average lowest temperature of the whole month. So that's the average nightly low, but this is the lowest temperature on average for those 10 years. Now, it's not the lowest temperature in the whole 10 years, but it is the average of the low temperatures for the winter, for the January. So you can see that Galveston's lowest January temperature for the last 10 years has been about 34. Means easily grow papayas almost in any winter. Hobby 29, Houston Intercontinental 27. You get down here near Waller, the Tomball Hooks Airport and the Brenham Airport. Average January is 25 and Brenham 23. And so what you see here, and you can compare this with December or February, you can see that this is your typical January temperature. So if you're near Tomball, for example, or near Brenham or halfway in between, you can expect in recent years that your typical January low is going to be somewhere in a hard freeze area. Now, it could be well that 2020 to 2030, it'll be warmer because we're warming the climate up pretty fast. But what I'm saying is that's the latest data on this thing. And so when you are selecting fruits, you're going to need to think in terms of, you know, if you're growing a papaya that kills at 29, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, where I am, my papayas make it most winters. This is the average low. So, and I grow them from seed, so like tomatoes. So it's easy enough for me to do, but not where you are without a greenhouse or something like that. And, but that may be changing. And if you get down here, this is south of College Station, it's pretty cold every January. So this is just some summary data here of some of the things. The average winter lowest temperature for the last is generally and been in this range. Over 10 years, though, you're looking at 15. So whereas vegetables, you might be able to grow vegetables based on this temperature. Mustard greens do fine at 25. You know, there are a lot of things you can grow. But if you are looking at the lowest temperature in 10 years, you need something that's pretty hardy. The chill in these areas, is more or less like this. These are chill units. I guess what I'm saying is that there are, so that's the case. So another thing to say is, that we have to go with what is going to happen in the future as well, which is to say that if you're growing things now, you might base it on what we did the last 10 years, but what these plants are going to be growing in, if they're fruit trees, is the next 20 years. So that's worth considering when you are, say, deciding, especially on temperate climate fruits. So Texas is getting wetter. I don't have to tell you that, I suppose, but it is getting wetter. And our droughts are getting worse. It's a Lake Conroe is and these are some basic data from, this is Houston's 10 wettest, 10 driest years in 132 years. And rainfall varies from around the place, but basically a lot of this is fairly similar. And this is since What year is this? This is year since 2001. 5 of the 10 wettest years um, have occurred, and 2 of the driest have happened since 1999. So we're very different from what we used to do. It's gotten way more extreme. And Texas is getting hotter. And Dr. Nielsen Gammon, who's an A&M professor, he has been measuring these temperatures for the last 40 years. It's clear that that's what's happening. This means basically that climate change is being caused by increasing the carbon dioxide insulation in the atmosphere so much, greenhouse gases. And this is the increase in temperature, average temperatures for the state of Texas. So that's 2 degrees between 2000 and about, looks like about 2012. And this is what he expects to see happen depending on what sort of changes are made in carbon emissions. But you can see that if he's right about this, and he's the state climatologist, that this is only 80 years from now, 12 degrees hotter is going to make everything we do with fruit trees is going to change quite a bit. If that's anything remotely like what he says, even at best, you're looking at somewheres in here probably, or something like that. So I guess what here is the 10 warmest at Hobby. I haven't done it for the Houston Weather Station because Houston Weather Station changed its location from downtown Houston to Intercontinental about I don't know what year it was, wasn't very long ago, 72 or something like that. But basically, you can see what's happening in terms of temperatures. This is since 1931, and all the colder temperatures. It's getting warmer, is I guess the simplest way of putting it. And that means that in general, it's going to get easier and easier to grow tropical and semi-tropical fruits in Waller, and it's going to get harder and harder to grow temperate climate fruits. And this is some other material here, just data, but 33% of the hottest weather, 30% in rural places. This included Brenham. 30% of the hottest temperatures ever recorded have happened since 2010. This is for yearly averages. And since 1990, 2/3 of them in Brenham, Liberty, and Danebang, which are rural weather stations. And virtually none of the coldest weather. So it's pretty obvious that we're getting hotter and hotter year by year. So what do we need to do? We need possibilities, what different temperatures we need, warmest to coldest areas, and some sort of way to help gardeners and farmers know what their temperatures are likely to be based on what plant requires in recent weather. So that's what the book is attempting to do, and I'll get to that pretty soon. That's vegetable stuff, but I also did about 75 fruits as well as to what sort of temperatures they need for how long and where they would grow. And so it's way more complicated than anything I could explain in 45 minutes. But zones are one of the ways that we do this. The USDA zones, which you may be familiar with, are based on data from 1980 to 2010. And they're basically the average low temperature for the winter. And there's a scale that they use. I've made it more tight than that, and I based it on more recent data. The 1980s were much colder, and this is just a 20-year period. But this is what we had in that 20-year period, 1992 to 2012. And this is the percentage of time that different temperatures were the lowest temperatures. This took quite a bit of effort to do, but you can see that 5% of the time, Galveston had a lowest winter temperatures of 38, 39. They were high zone 10B, and they've actually had one in zone 11 since then in recent years. They had a 42 or something. And this is the percentage of time they had different things, and their lowest temperature for that 20-year period was in the 25 to 27 degree range. So, and you can see different places here. This is where I am. I'm basically in zone 10A, as often as I am below 9B plus. Now, when we get to where you guys are, this is Sealy, Brenham, and Tomball here, which are the closest places to Waller County where I can find weather data. And you can see that even in these places, you sometimes get temperatures that are quite mild in the summertime, and have done that in that 20-year period. But mostly you're getting things here, 64%. If you look at this temperatures between 23 and 27, this is 34% here, and here we get what's that, 74% here, 65, 70% in Brenham, and 65% of the time in Tomball. So, but you see also getting temperatures out here, 10% of the time, 15 to 17, and 5% of the time, 15 to 17. So that's what you're dealing with in terms of if you want to plant something, and that's in that period of time, what will happen. So then what we do is we go to, so basically, you are basically in this region here in terms of most years, but sometimes you're here and occasionally up in here. So what I'm saying is that when you plant something, you need to assume that most years you're going to be in this range, and but you realize that you get this kind of temperature occasionally, and so you need to, the question is, how often is that? 5% means 1 year in 20. I'm willing to protect a tree 1 year in 20. It's real easy to do. But something that happens almost every year, that seems like too much for me. So then you rate these fruits in terms of this awesome and stuff by the temperatures at which they tolerate. And in some cases, like blackberries are a temperate fruit and they tolerate all of it. And cantaloupes are annuals and they're dead by winter time anyway. But So these are what I judge to be awesome in the sense that we know they work, and you can see that they'll all work well. When you get to something like an orange or a grapefruit, um, basically the right grapefruits are pretty darn good, and same with oranges. As long as your temperatures don't actually drop below 25. Soon as they start going below 25, they're still growable. But if you have the right variety on the right rootstock, but it starts getting harder. You can't call it as reliable, for one thing. And I showed so there's a whole lot of these things. All the mandarins, satsumas, and things are really amazing stuff. But when you get down here to avocados, it really depends on if you're growing the hardiest varieties. And you get down here, star fruit. I'm getting production on star fruit myself, and I'm in this zone here. But this is a complete waste of time because of the temperatures. And papaya is the same thing. We're assuming outside, we're not talking. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are large numbers of fruit possibilities, and they're ranked in the book by my best guess. So this is the ratings that we had for Tomball and Brenham. These are the percentages of time they had different chill amounts, 60% less than 800. 600 is a typical one, and 40% of the time greater than 800 chill. And you can see what it is for Brenham, and Waller's sort of between these two. So you can assume that that's roughly the chill that you're probably dealing with most years. So some really good varieties for Waller. The Chickasaw is a blackberry with the right amount of chill. All of these probably will work because blackberries seem to be adapted regardless of chill pretty well. Plums, these would be the ones I would recommend. And you can get this out of the book if you're, and so on. These are blueberries that work, and some other ones. And Miwa kumquat should be work well regardless of how cold it gets for you. That's just spring harvested stuff. I found I don't have a really good shot of blueberries, but blueberries are incredibly productive if you grow them right, and really worth doing. Summer harvest ones, figs, pears, muscadines, sweet muscadine, grapes, cantaloupes, just 4 really amazingly good stuff. There's an Acres Homes pear, which is a wonderful pear, absolutely stunningly good tasting. And fall harvests, persimmons, Asian persimmons are some of the best things I know of. I've been eating them daily now for several weeks. All the mandarins, the tangerines, big early satsuma, obawase, Kimbrough. People love the Kishu mandarin. All of those things all the mandarins should do well in Waller. Basically on a trifoliate rootstock, they are good to about 18 degrees or so. So you should have no trouble with that. And there's a couple of navel oranges that are early ripening that are worth doing. That's a cara right there. Persimmon. Winter ones, depending on how cold your winter is, it gets a little bit. Saruga persimmons are a non-astringent persimmon that ripens totally about December 1, which means they'll be in the refrigerator into January. And the problem being with the non-astringent persimmons is that birds go after them and lots of other animals do pretty fast. But there are, again, more mandarins that should ripen in December. And the Bloom Sweet grapefruit pictured here is probably the hardiest of the grapefruits. It survived 14 degrees with bad damage. So I think you could probably grow that as well. There's a grapefruits, a citrus, there's just amazing amounts of citrus you can grow. So that's it in a nutshell. And I went through an awful lot of stuff fast, so great to have questions. And great to have questions, and I can take some up if people have them. And obviously fruits are a bottomless topic, and there's, I think, maybe a couple hundred pages or so in the book on how different fruits and so on. You're muted. Yeah. Can't hear you.
Now, I'm not muted. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Randall. Let's see, I'm sitting here in this room. Do we have anybody here with some questions? What's the recommended chill hours for Waller County, chill units?
Yeah, it's typically 600 hours or up to 800, something like that. In the book, there's a table, and should be pretty obvious. Winter chill for on page 369, and just a second here. Brenham is average 700 hours is what we're doing, 600 to 800 hours. And that, if you're near Brenham, then it's that. And Tomball, just a minute here. Tomball is 600. So 600 to 700 hours.
Thank you.
It's the closest place.
I found it quite interesting, Dr. Randall, that you gave watermelons a B+ for our area.
Yeah.
But here in Hempstead, where we are, we're known as the watermelon capital, and they grow lots of watermelons. So I wonder if production has decreased over time because our temperatures are getting hotter.
That I don't know, but the B+ is that most of the people that buy this book have relatively small garden sizes.
Mhm.
And watermelons are basically desert plants, and in terms of their origins, and they really like to spread out, and they do best in big areas where you have good drainage. And much of the Gulf Coast is really bad drainage. So it's basically for productivity. It doesn't produce huge amounts for the space. But if you have lots of space and you have good, especially on a hilly area or something like that, or good sandy loam soil or something, that they produce really well.
So our growers are probably A-okay.
Yeah, B plus is better than most, and B is better than most, and B plus is just short of A minus, which is a type of awesome.
I got it.
But they're not, for most people in most of the area, they're not. They're, all of the ratings are a. You can't do a fruit rating independent of your own judgment. And so, I mean, I know people, especially with of East Asian heritage, who just can't love jujubes, which will grow in, Lubbock. I mean, they'll grow anywhere in Texas, and they're very productive.
Except in my yard. I have one in my yard and I never get anything. No, I do get fruit, but the squirrels eat it before I could get it.
Well, that's it. A lot of people prefer pruning jujubes to about 8 feet, not letting them get taller than that. And the squirrels would have a harder time on that, I think. If mine's way too tall, also, I might add. So,
Any other questions? Anybody here? Nora? Okay, Nora. Okay, you talked about trifoliate rootstock. Is
Yeah.
there any other rootstock that would be effective for Waller County?
Okay, so let me talk about citrus rootstocks. There is a section in the book about that topic, but trifoliate is the only temperate climate citrus, or at least only common one. And it'll survive minus 35 degrees. So what you do when you use a trifoliate rootstock is you make it go dormant when the light declines, and it ends dormancy when there's enough daylight. So it's going to be dormant. Whereas if you use, say, sour orange rootstock, sour orange is a semi-tropical fruit, and it doesn't go dormant based on light, it goes dormant based on temperature. So if we get a December day that's 82, and then a panhandle wind comes through and knocks it down to 26, that tree is just devastating. Now, the thing that sour orange does really well is the fact that salty water, if you have a bad well or something that you're irrigating from, or you're near the coast, sour orange is pretty good rootstock. Same thing with the Rio Grande Valley, because it tolerates salty water much more than trifoliate does. So there's positive and negatives for the common ones. Now, what you're going to see is a trifoliate hybrid called a citrange. And citranges are commonly used around Metro Houston area as rootstocks, especially for citremolo is another one of those. Anything with a CIT in the name means it's a trifoliate hybrid with a what's called a mainstream citrus of some sort. So it's a grapefruit trifoliate hybrid is a citremolo, and a citrange is an orange grapefruit, orange trifoliate hybrid. So both of those are intermediate in hardiness. And depending on where you are, they're more or less. If you were in Conroe, I would say just flat out do not use anything other than trifoliate. If you're in Galveston, I think you can use just about anything you want. They're mostly all work. And where you are, I would say that the 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 more the I mean, uh, let's see. I don't know if I can answer this correctly, but for me, it used to be in the 1980s that there was no chance of growing anything on sour orange because I would get temperatures that were down in the low 20s and stuff like this. But that's not true anymore here. I've had one temperature around 20 now since 1996 where I am. And so I don't have a problem actually with using sour orange, which is the least hardier. There's actually a rough lemon rootstock that they sometimes use that's even worse for us. So I don't know if that's a right answer, but I would say that you can cautiously use citrangas and citremolos where you are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else in here have questions?
Have there been any studies done as far as reforestation and restoring the trees and other plants to cool the temperature down?
One of our members here, Harvey, wants to know if there have been any studies done on reforestation to try to cool the temperatures down.
Yes, there's been a lot of such studies, actually. And reforestation and reprariation, they're both probably those are the only cost-effective options other than putting the stuff in the air in the first place. But in terms of taking it out of the air, that's the only cost-effective. And the most practical thing would be to actually take land across the planet that is being used to grow feed for animals, which farmers do not make much money off of that. You're growing feed corn or feed soy or something like that. You're not making hardly any money off of that. And it wouldn't be hard to pay somebody to basically grow forest or prairie on their land. If you're making, say, $50 or $100 an acre on feed corn with all the risk, $100 an acre, you could have them growing forest. And what that would do is sequester quite a bit of carbon in the soil, but on top of that, vegetation of that sort reflects infrared at a different range. And basically forests cool themselves differently than, say, bare earth does. Bare earth is the infrared that is triggering greenhouse gases. It's the heat. And, all you have to do is, if you've got plants beside a piece of pavement on a hot day, put your hand on the plant and put your hand on the pavement, and you'll see which one's hotter. You probably know what the answer is, but plants cool themselves through transpiration. Most of the water on hot days that plants use is to cool themselves, 90% in some cases. And so basically, there's an enormous amount that can be done that way, and it's easily the cheapest thing you could do. It's way cheaper than electrifying our cars or any number of other things. So.
You said thank you. Any other questions here in the room? Okay, let me check the chat box one more time for questions. No questions there. Oh, Corliss has a question. Go ahead, Corliss.
Good morning, Dr. Randall.
Morning.
I have a question. About growing fruit trees in containers. How does the how does chill factor affect that, and also the the lifespan of small dwarf fruit trees in small trees in a container? How is that affected by growing it in the container?
Oh,
About a 25 gallon container.
yeah. Well, you know, in nature, a tree in general will put out roots maybe 3 times as far as the drip line of the trees. And, they thrive by putting out this huge root system. And whenever you grow something in a pot, and if you ever took stuff out of a pot, you know that the roots basically will get to the edge of the thing and they clearly would have liked to go further. So, what I tell people who want to grow anything in a pot is that the bigger the pot, the easier it is that you'll do. And I've had people who wanted to grow a fig on a 14th floor patio stretching out, on the south side of a house or something, apartment, let's say. And but the broad thing is that the more space you can give a tree, the better. And the bigger the pot you use, the better. And the smaller the pot, the harder it is for it to produce a lot of fruit. So one of the things is that you generally will get more production out of something that produces small fruits like kumquats or blackberries or strawberries or figs maybe, but as opposed to say growing grapefruit in a pot. And broadly, if you're good enough at it, and you could go to some place like Tree Search Farms, and you can see that they're quite capable of harvesting a lot of, say, star fruit in a greenhouse in a pot. And I've seen, but I guess so. The answer is that the better you are at horticulture, the better you're going to do. It's really helpful to have a irrigation system on a timer that drip feeds the pot, because a big problem is trees take up an enormous amount of water every day, and they're not going to get it from the soil if they're in a pot. So basically, you don't want this thing to dry out, and you don't want to flood. And the third problem is that the water, if you're using entirely irrigation water, water is not pure water. And so unless you have very large rainwater cisterns or something, you're going to also create a certain amount of soil problems over time with the water that you're using. But the main problem is that on a hot day in summer, a lot of these trees need sun. So the plastic will heat up, and they need enough water, or else they wilt and leaves fall off. And leaves are what give you fruit. I would say that if you're try to grow something like blackberries tied to a stake, or maybe blueberries, or I've seen people grow significant amounts of citrus in pots if you use large pots. But it takes skill. And if you miss on the water, they're dead, or they're hurt. And so it's easier in the ground where there's a much bigger reservoir of water, and there's a lot less problems with temperatures.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with questions? Nobody online with questions. Okay, well, Dr. Randall, we thank you very much for giving us some of your time this morning. We do appreciate it. And hopefully, maybe someday soon, we'll be able to see you in person.
Same, I agree. Nice to
Thank
see
you. Have a good day.
you. Bye.